Hey.
Hey, I see it right here. I see the StreamYard. It's up and scheduled. It's showing up on YouTube too. I don't know why you're not seeing it.
I just went on the one for March 6th, and it seems like there's people here, but that's the wrong date.
Oh, well, the one that's created on March 6th, but it's scheduled
Okay.
for today.
Okay, hold on. I gotta go. One second. Hi, guys. I'm sorry. We're having some technical difficulties. Hi, Ivana. So sorry for some confusion. Can you see and hear me okay? Okay, thank you, Alana. I appreciate it. Let me just get my slides organized for 1 second. Well, one mistake I made is that our time zones don't change here in Arizona. So I forgot that I needed to be here an hour sooner today. So I just barely made it, and then I had a little flustering. So thank you for being here. You're in the right place if you're here for why now is the time to become a mold expert. So I'm Bridget Danner. If you want to say in the chat where you're from or that kind of thing, what you'd like to learn today, I'd love to get to know you. Hi, Heather. Hi, Gary, Upper Michigan. Okay. Is it still quite cold there? Croatia, Arizona. Okay. I've heard Croatia is really beautiful. Is it humid? I'm always wondering because of mold. Hi, Magda from South Africa. Wow, that sounds exciting. So we have our first international student on our toxic mold train program from Australia. So I'm super excited about that. And we have a student from Hawaii. Hi, Noelle from Ontario, Beth from New York. Okay, awesome. I'm just going to do one more little adjustment and then I'll start us going. Anne from Austin, Texas. And I know that place has mold. It's notorious. Marina, I think we may actually have a slide about choosing an inspector on here. But it's a bit more of a sampling. Yeah, Kat, I'm in Chandler, Arizona. After my mold, we moved here. Oh, great. Northern California, Colorado. Yes, Jared, as soon as the presentation is over, it'll go right onto YouTube at the same exact link. So if you missed anything or you want to see the slides, Park City, Utah, that's one of my favorite places ever. Because it's a live, all this chit chat in the beginning, I can't edit out later. So if you want to watch the recording later, I just tell people like the point where we start the slides so that you don't have to later listen to my chit chatting. Okay. Oh, you're in the Biltmore area. How awesome. I love it there. Okay, 1 second. Okay. And so I did the same presentation last week, first time, and it went really great. It lasted about 45 minutes, and then I did questions, not too long, 5 or 10 minutes. But I can stay on like 15 minutes if you like. Sound is echoing. Do you have 2 tabs open, perhaps? I think it sounds good on my end. Is anybody else having trouble? Bridget from Gilbert. We're practically twins. That's amazing. Have we met before? Have we discussed this before? I don't think we have. Okay, well, I'm going to have to track you down. Okay, yeah, Christopher, see if you have two YouTube tabs open. That's sometimes a problem if it's like you're hearing it twice. Okay, awesome. Okay, well, Bridget, maybe you're on maybe we can connect on Instagram or something. I just met another Bridget at my chiropractor the other day. There aren't many of us. Okay. So thank you again for being here. I've just been really enjoying doing some live material and doing some new material and connecting with you guys and giving a little background first on why mold is a bigger issue now, and why it's something we should be paying attention to. And then I go into, I think I have 8 myths about mold that I see come up in the space that are frustrating to me. So I wanted you to just be aware of them and learn more about them. Ultimately, I'm doing this webinar throughout March because in April we're starting our practitioner training course. You don't have to be a practitioner to join. You can be a mold advocate. I just got a question from someone who wants to be like a mold informed realtor. So that was really interesting. But it's like definitely a deep dive. So I want to give you a sense today that we know our stuff. We're in the trenches with all these really complex questions within the mold world. So you're welcome to use the chat as we go, and I'll answer questions later though, but feel free to chat and ask a question in the meantime. I may answer it by the end, but I'll also go back later. So this is a educational video. I definitely think it's great to have a physician, a whole team of support really as you go through your mold journey. And I know depending on where you live, sometimes it's harder to find local support. But luckily, I think the online community is really growing in more and more opportunities. So if you haven't met me before, and some of you may have not because some of my colleagues have shared this webinar with you, but you may have seen me like on some summits. I've done some mold summits, some hormone summits. I was working as an acupuncturist initially, and I started my career in Portland, Oregon, where it's quite wet. And I was slowly getting sick there, even as I was, having healthy habits, was kind of trying everything to feel better. And that's kind of how I got introduced to mold. But I had a very busy clinic in Portland doing different integrative treatments. We had chiropractic and naturopathic. So I'm familiar with definitely like a lot of modalities out there. This is Mickey Contini. You may not know her, but she's amazing. She's a coach for our team and a complete mold expert in her own right. She sees a lot more clients than I do on a weekly basis. She also had a long background in health before she became affected by mold on the East Coast. So she's studied with different people than I have. So we teach this course together and we make a really nice team because we both have our own style and our own background. So a little bit more about my story. I was realizing I first got exposed to this moldy home I was in actually about 16 years ago now, maybe 17. So I got engaged. I moved into this home that was an old home with lots of additions to it and a lot of problems that we weren't aware of. So most mold is not going to be visible. It's going to be behind the walls, in the floorboards, that kind of a thing. You can see on the left a picture of some of the water damage that was under carpeting. And this is actually in my son's room. And in the middle here is, I think this was cut from a video. My eyelid was twitching. I was having like nervous system issues. I was so puffy, right, from the lymph building up from just not being able to detox. And this is my ex-husband on the right when we were in, one of the stages of like remediation. So it's a long time ago, right? But I spent many years not knowing I was in mold and just trying to improve my diet and do yoga and have a good night routine. And I actually think those things kind of kept me functional, but barely. I had tons of like chills and fever, issues with my period, issues with my mood, gut issues, and nobody suggested mold for quite a long time. It just wasn't as talked about back then. So, I was already working in healthcare, learning a lot, studying functional medicine when I found out I had mold, and then that really shifted the course of my career because as you know, if you're here, it's probably affected you too. It's so dramatic, it's so intense that I just wanted to switch into talking more about mold. So, well, let me back up one thing. So, Mickey and I have been talking for a few years about making a course because we just felt like, there needs to be more mold literate practitioners out there. And I kind of mentioned earlier, this is the things we're going to cover today. I have a lot of slides, so I hope you really enjoy it. And then at the end, I'll show you a little bit more about this course I mentioned. So just briefly, what is mold? There are lots of species of mold. Mold's been around a long, long time on this planet. Not all of them are toxic, but even if they don't fall into the toxic category, they can be a burden on our body when there's too much mold in our living space, working space. Plus, everything's mixing together in an indoor environment. So there can be chemicals, yeast, bacteria, VOCs. So we'll see a slide on it later, but it's never in isolation. I'll talk more about that. So mold develops from lots of reasons, right? Inside the home. And I'm going to say home here, but this certainly could be, an RV or a workplace, a school, what have you. Lots of ways that mold can develop. Basically, as water hits the indoor area or humidity is too high. So we'll talk more about this in a minute. Well, here's the minute. The odds of having mold are low. That's the first kind of myth. And if you're here, you probably know that's not true. But I think in the mainstream, it still seems, even though it's getting more awareness, you wouldn't think that it's this common. So I was going to call this myth, the odds of having mold are 1 in 4, because I hear some people kind of spit out these statistics like, oh, did you know 1 in 4 buildings have mold damage or water damage? If you think about a building in its lifetime, is it going to have water damage? I would say almost 100% guaranteed, right? It's probably going to have water damage a few times over. If your basement floods, if a tree falls on your roof, if your kid overruns the bathtub, if your dishwasher fails and you're not home, there's just so many ways that a building could be affected by water. And not all the water is going to be like a permanent problem, but it's just very common, right? Even since I've moved to Arizona, I've had 2 homes here, and I've had a roof leak, I've had a window leak. Luckily, I live in a very dry place, and we can talk more about kind of how that makes things a little different. But if you think about it, there's a lot of chances for water to enter your home. And statistically, oh yeah, this is just self-reported office buildings in the US, that they've had water damage, that they currently have an issue, and where it is. So yeah, super common. And in places like office buildings, things definitely aren't always remediated correctly. Okay, this statistic is about what's projected. This is kind of about how insurance claims are going to be affected and how much damage we can expect in the years ahead. So this is like a governmental projection that there's going to be a more than 1/3 increase in this coming period because of the effect of climate change on flooding. So as I mentioned earlier, not every instance of water damage has to end in mold, but you generally have to remediate correctly to avoid it. So I think there's some instances like where I am in Arizona, some things just dry so incredibly fast, it doesn't really give mold a chance to grow. But normally, you need to remediate in the first 24 to 48 hours or mold will start to grow. So you need to remove, carpet and damaged materials. And pretty much every city has these services where you can get emergency like restoration. So that's really important if you have something sudden. Some things are undetected. So mold is just growing, behind the wall and we just don't know, right? So myth number 2 is that we are a healthy country. So I know we have a population here from all over the world, and I didn't look as much up on the statistics in other countries. But here in the US, it's really shocking, how many people have chronic disease and the trends are only growing. Now, some of our chronic disease is due to nutritional quality and lack of movement and stress, isolation, all sorts of things, but some of it is due to mold, and we'll look at that more. Just like we showed earlier, water damage is increasing, climate change is real. We're going to see increase in chronic disease as well, unfortunately. So if you look online for your state or even your country, you can see some statistics on the chronic diseases, the top chronic diseases. And again, not all of every case is going to be due to mold, but mold could be involved in many of the cases, even things like cancer and heart disease. I have a close friend right now who just recently got her urine test back and her home test back, and she sky high in mold in both cases, and just a few weeks earlier was asked to have a biopsy for some irregular cells in her breast tissue, and she's not old, right? So if she weren't having any awareness of mold, she'd just think, well, this is some like fluke thing, or is it genetics, or like, why am I having this? But luckily she's knowing that she's been exposed to mold, and we have the testing to show it, so she can take action. But many people just don't know about this stuff, which is another reason to just get out there and spread the word. So even things like kidney disease or like frequent, infections, like things that we might not even think about as being related to mold, insulin resistance. Yes, there's like dietary reasons, stress reasons, but mold can affect the way that like the cell membrane operates, and it can affect insulin levels and insulin sensitivity because of all the inflammation it makes. So it's just amazing how many conditions it can play a part in. I shared this on our own newsletter, but this is, there's just tons of references about different disease conditions and mycotoxins. So the way I usually search is on PubMed, and they have tons of different articles. If you're, perhaps right now you or a loved one, you're like, could this be related to mold? And you can go look it up. This little article or quote is about the intestinal barrier being dysregulated due to mycotoxins. And you probably know that barrier is so important. And when that barrier is compromised, that creates more inflammation in the body. And here it says increased translocation of luminal antigens and pathogens and an excessive activation of the immune system. So we see autoimmune diseases come really commonly with mold, as well as digestive symptoms. When that gut barrier isn't strong, then the brain barrier also is getting affected. And then we see, the inflammation in the brain causing confusion and, poor recall, moodiness, anger. Lots of interesting stuff on the gut and mold. This is just a little, if you want to look up more like your own area, state by state, different conditions vary. It's kind of interesting. So what are some of the mechanisms? I won't spend too long on this, but this is something about the nasal microbiome and biofilm. And here's one little quote. Mold may be harbored internally and continue to release and or produce mycotoxins, which contribute to ongoing chronic illness. So this is about exposure to water damaged buildings and mold basically colonizing in the nose and creating these long-term problems. So that's one reason, even if you get out of mold, you could still be sick. You really do need to address it. I've had clients come and say, well, I was in a moldy home. I moved out 2 years ago, but I never really did anything. And their levels are still present in their urine and their symptoms are still present. So sometimes you can just get to a really clean environment and the body will detoxify itself. But generally, it needs more support than that. This is something about if there's already pre-existing immune dysregulation and then mold is added to the mix, then things are exacerbated. This is a more positive little study about things, how curcumin, and this will come up again later, can be helpful for some of the inflammation and oxidation that can be caused by mycotoxins. So there is good news we will get to. Okay, myth number 3, only if you have the dreaded gene do you get sick. So anyone can get sick from mold exposure, but you can also be in mold and not really get, how can I say, clearly sick through your symptoms, at least for a while. So there's just so many components. A young infant is actually really vulnerable to mold. Children can be more vulnerable in some ways, or children can be hardier. Being, in older age can be a factor. We'll talk more about the different genetic factors. I really think how long you've been in the home, how severe the mold is very much a factor. Some people have had many exposures through their life in different places they've lived. So this is some statistics about what conditions did people have before they found out they had mold illness. And some of it has to do with respiratory or immune dysregulation pre-existing, and that population being more sensitive to molds. And then again, like, where are you working? When I got sicker, it's when I started working from home. It's because I used to go to a clinic 5 days a week, 4 days a week, and then I was home all the time. So I was in it more, so I got sicker. And women also can be more prone to it because of some of the ways our body creates inflammation to combat infections. So the dreaded gene, HLA-DR gene, is a factor if it's expressing in autoimmunity, inflammatory diseases. That's a real thing, right? But it's not the only factor. And just be aware too that there's other factors that affect your ability to detox. It's not just that one thing. So here's a few examples just about how we produce glutathione I think that's a lot of these. Methylation process in the liver can be affected by different genes. So, you could be exposed to mold, but be genetically really great at detoxing, and you won't show symptoms nearly as soon as somebody who has genes that make them very poor at detoxing. But again, genes aren't the only factor. So moving into the home environment a little more, myth number 4, you just have to kill the mold. So mold and mycotoxins are 2 different things. Mold is a biological thing and it's living. And then mycotoxins are just chemical waste that mold is giving off. So mycotoxins cannot be killed. They can be dealt with in other ways, but they can't be killed because they're not living things. So that's a really important distinction to make. And if you hire a less knowledgeable person to work on your house, they may not really get this part. They still might be helpful for some part of your journey, but they're not going to maybe understand the mycotoxin part. Okay, so this is a graphic from Richie Shoemaker's page, Surviving Toxic Mold. Just kind of, I mean, obviously it's quite enlarged, but one mold spore is invisible to the naked eye. It can be seen when it's in a cluster, a colony, but mycotoxins are definitely invisible to the naked eye. Over here on the right, you can see mycotoxin sizes 0.1 micron. Spore fragments, which are super, super common, are 0.02 to 0.7 microns. And then a spore, like an aspergillus spore, is 2 to 3 microns. So they're all very, very small. But mycotoxins are, always very small, and also chemicals and not living things, as I mentioned. So probably, I think this myth is coming up, but I just see a lot of mistakes being made around belongings where these mycotoxins are embedded very deeply and people trying to keep those belongings. This is basically what I just said. And this is just a quote I found when I was making this presentation, that in a water damaged building, there could be up to 1 billion spores per cubic meter of air. It's crazy. It's just crazy to think about. Okay, moving a bit into treatment, but I think we'll get back into the building side in a minute. Mycotoxin testing and treatment is A plus B equals C. So what do I mean by that? Basically, what I'm seeing a lot of lately is people get a home test or a urine test, and they want to get the binder that matches it. End of story. And it's just a big oversimplification of the process. So here's why. One mold species may produce many different mycotoxins, and several species may produce the same mycotoxin. So it's not like one mold makes one mycotoxin and then you take the binder that matches. There's a lot of overlap. Also, depending on the environmental conditions of a mold colony, may be producing different mycotoxins at a different moment. So if it's stressed because the environment became dry and now it's like, shedding, it may produce different mycotoxins than in another instance. So that's going to change. When you get tested on one day versus a month later, you might see different things. Third point, and I mentioned this earlier, nothing's happening by itself. If you have one mold, you probably have several other molds too, and they're not all being tested for. And we don't really understand how all the molds work together and how that makes a different effect on you. So similar to when we talk about chemicals in the environment, right? Like if we're exposed to, perfumes and VOC from paint and, heavy metals in our water, and like we don't fully understand how all those things work together. So we may be able to say, well, this chemical could be dangerous, but like we don't know for sure if it could made you sick. Okay, yeah, we might not know for sure, but when we add all those things together, we know that they're a burden on our body, and they're all happening at the same time. This isn't like a petri dish. Well, it kind of is like a petri dish, but it isn't a controlled experiment. It's real life, and everything's mixed together in real life. This is something that really, really shocked me when I was doing some research for our course, is that there could be like a second level of mycotoxins after the first level is produced. So plant metabolisms may produce hidden mycotoxins that are modified substances that may not be detected with the method of analysis used to identify their parent compounds. So let this one sink in. Like if we think we've mastered testing, we just might not even be testing a whole bunch of stuff that we don't even know how to test yet. So 20 years from now, we may have very different testing than we do now. So many, many types of mycotoxins, right? If you get a test run, it's maybe testing 20 types. It's not testing several hundred types. So this isn't to discourage you from getting tested. It's just to encourage you to see that there's a bigger picture going on, and we'll talk about that. But the tests that are available to us now try to cover a lot of different angles of mold, right? There actually aren't that many toxic molds, maybe only like 15 or something. So it's trying to cover a lot of, a lot of different species, which is great. And some tests and some mycotoxins, like the citrinin you see on the left, it's produced by tons of different molds. So usually when they test that, they just say, various molds. This is Real Time, another brand or company that offers mycotoxin testing, and just kind of want to give you a sense of how the different tests kind of look and what they test for. This is just a chart from Mosaic, and instead of saying, this mycotoxin is from this mold, which they also kind of do that, this is, I think, a helpful chart to see. Like, let's say you have ochratoxin A positive. Well, you can see that almost every single one of these categories of body systems could be influenced by ochratoxin A. So, brain health, oxidative stress, which could mean, pain and different symptoms, immune system, liver toxicity, GI. So just, I think this is the helpful way to look at it, is know that, these molds can affect all different body systems. So it's, yes, we want to maybe bind and remove molds in different ways, but we also want to restore body systems. There's something else I was going to say about that, but it'll come back. So here's just a picture just to visualize like what a mycotoxin looks like. Again, it's just a chemical compound, and there's many styles of it. And this is just kind of, this was what I was going to mention more about, is that when you have a urine test, you are actually not testing a mold or a mycotoxin. You are testing a metabolite of a mycotoxin. So mycotoxin has hit your system in some way, and now your liver has processed it. And in this case, it's become a water-soluble metabolite, and it's been put through to the kidneys and the bladder to be expelled. So it's, it's not, it's suggesting, or it's an indirect way, right, measuring what's happened in your body. So that's just another way to think of this too, right? Like, it's not so one-to-one, like this test said I have this mold. It's like, we're seeing what's come through you. And to that point, that's different than a fat soluble metabolite that's going through your bile into your stool, right? So that there's a limit to some extent, because it's measuring only what comes through to your, your kidney bladder system. You can tell I'm pretty keen on this point because I have a bunch of slides about it. So instead of the strategy being so simplistic, first, I really encourage people to, focus on the foundations. Do they have a support system? Are they eating a healthy diet? Are they having bowel movements? Are they drinking enough water? And then right along with that is, are you staying in the environment? Or are you getting out? Or what are you doing, right? Because you're really not going to get better while you're still in it. We can talk more about that, but there's things you could do to kind of help yourself while you're still in that environment, but ultimately you can't heal in that environment. Then there's, the issue of detoxing and moving lymph, which a binder is a component, but certainly not the only component or thing on the menu. And then really supporting all the body systems that have been damaged. So I kind of already harped on this point, but This is like to say that binders aren't even the only option. So I have clients who don't tolerate binders and they still got better. Like test results show they are better. So do you absolutely need a binder that's like in a pill form or what have you to get better? No, you don't, because we already learned like the liver is metabolizing mycotoxins. Certain fibrous foods can be catching and binding mycotoxins in the GI system. When you do things like use the sauna, that can be helpful. Antioxidants can be helpful. I think that we'll find out more about this over time, but mold and mycotoxins are very much metabolized in the gut as long as the gut has some health to it, right? If the gut gets more and more broken down because of your mold exposure, you're going to kind of lose that ability. But there is some ability of yeast and like Saccharomyces boulardii and different components being able to clear mold from you. So that's pretty cool. This is sort of relating to some of the stuff about the home, that there are different ways to neutralize mycotoxins in the home. There's different options. Obviously not a very long list. And some of them are a little extreme. So getting back to how the body detoxifies mold, this is just a nice graphic on the process and some of the nutrients you need to support this process. So that's why doing things like supplemental glutathione, B vitamins, protein is really helpful because your liver is working super hard right now and it needs this support. So sometimes we think, oh, well, I need to do like a liver detox. And you can take herbs to support the liver or, clean out other areas of your life to support the liver, but the liver also needs some just ordinary things like magnesium. So sometimes, just doing these foundational simple things are really great for you. This is a little bit about tracking how a certain mycotoxin is detoxed in the liver, and certain mycotoxins go down certain pathways like of detox. This is how I mentioned the gut has some ability to do it. So the intestinal mucosa in this case was transforming a mycotoxin. Here are some other agents that can help with mycotoxins, some strains of lactobacillus, strains of Saccharomyces, and then prebiotic fibers. This is a graphic from Dr. Neil Nathan about which pathways mycotoxins go through in the liver. So really interesting. And then what foods and supplements can support it. So you'll see curcumin again in here, cruciferous vegetables, salmon, algae, walnuts. So you can add a lot of rich foods to your diet to support detox. Now, I know many people with mold have food sensitivities, so you may not be able to add all these things, but I bet you can add more than you think. Like you can have, ginger tea. Probably most anyone can tolerate that. A few people can't. If you can't add really complex fibrous foods quite yet, you just add what you can. Green tea. Here's some information about how steamed greens can work as a binder. So simple, right? It's a good reminder for all of us to eat our steamed greens. I just put a client on this kind of a protocol because she's sensitive to binders. This is a graphic about certain mycotoxins and which actual binders kind of bind them. So you can see over on the right, probiotics do quite a few. But this probably isn't my favorite graphic. And I think charcoal binds more things than this, for example. But this is probably just like what's been, certain studies that they combed. So the purpose of a binder is generally to trap toxins in the colon through kind of an attractive mechanism or like a web sort of mechanism, I guess you could say, to prevent toxins that are spit into the bile from being brought back into the body. So the body tends to actually it recycles bile salts, and in that way it can pull the toxins back through. So you want to be having a bowel movement often, really more than once a day if you're going through a detox. This is our binder on the right, and it has bowel movers and bile movers. So instead of just being a binder, it has some other elements that we kind of know go together to help you actually, get those toxins out. So some people, binders can bind nutrients, and we talk about that in our course. However, they're not like a complete trap for everything that they come across. They kind of weakly bind things, which is why some people feel kind of worse when they're on a binder because it's dragging the toxin kind of through the system. And those people might need more antioxidant type support, or they just can't handle that binder right then. And again, so we don't oversimplify binders, know that we have to be moving the bowels and moving the bile at the same time. And that mold and mycotoxins can be lurking in other systems is really important, like the brain and the sinuses. This is just one tip from our course about a way to treat the sinus area. Sinus area is a major mess of all sorts of things. So it's a really great area for you to treat when you're in mold. And I think it's a great thing to treat just in life. So here's my former home that was the moldy home, and we had water damage underneath our siding. So that was one thing that we remediated. And as we move more into this home piece, I just think it's really important if you want to be a mold expert, even at just a health expert, that you understand the home, right? Because this is an environmental illness. Your client is sick because of an environment, and they're going to be coming to you saying, do you think I'm approaching this right? Or do you think I should move? And what should I do about my TV? And you want to have some answers that you're not just making up. And you don't have to say you know everything. You can refer out to an inspector or mediator, etc. But there's a gap. And if you're here on this webinar because you want to help fill that gap, great, because there's a definite gap about people don't have enough support about what to do about their home and their stuff. And they're really stressed out about it. So even though it's not my number one specialty, I just, I stay aware of it. I've learned more and more about it because it's just a conversation I have to have often with my clients. So like I mentioned, you could even just focus on the home side. There's a coach out there. I'm totally forgetting her name right now. Maybe you can put it in the chat if you know who I mean. She's like a coach for, the home, and she consults you about kind of you bring all your tests and your questions and stuff to her, and she will review them for you. And she's booked out for months. So this home side is a big gap, like I mentioned. Okay, so another myth is to just run an ERMI test. So I have lots of clients who are like, well, my practitioner thought I had mold, so she told me to run an ERMI. And then we got the ERMI back and we didn't know what to even think about it. Okay, it's not enough. It's not enough to run an ERMI because you don't know even where the mold came from. You don't know how to interpret it. Right, so this is some of the mold under my siding, like I mentioned earlier. Would an ERMI test tell me this is where it came from? No, that was from an inspection, right? So just like the body is really complex, your home is complex. It has maybe an attic and a basement and 3 bathrooms and all this stuff. So it's not enough to just run an ERMI, and that's why we want to make more trained practitioners. Because if a practitioner only knows a tiny bit and tells you to run an ERMI and then can't really tell you what to do about it, now the client is just upset and confused. So another kind of mistake I see with client or practitioners who aren't well trained is they kind of oversimplify things and they're like, well, just move. Or sometimes they refuse to work with you until you move. Um, and some of it is frankly, they don't really know the ins and outs or what to tell you. So they're just kind of blunt and they're not very helpful. Um, while if I know a client's in a really moldy home and they're really sick, I'm never going to say, "Oh, just take it easy, just stay." I understand that they need to find a new place and like their health isn't good. They're going through a lot. Like I'm understanding of where they're at. I'm not going to throw a bunch of parasite protocols and stuff at them while they're in this situation, but I will work with them where they're at and encourage them to be like taking steps, right? A lot of what I do, and I don't know if I'm always successful, but is I just encourage clients to find their like place of calm and center so they can make good decisions because mold is possibly making them like really anxious. Plus, this situation is making them really anxious, and they just can't even like think clearly to make a good decision. So, that's one thing you can do for yourself if you're listening is like, I know there's so many decisions to make, but just focus on the decisions you can make now from a centered place. Like maybe you go out to a lake for a day and you like bring some food and you sit and you like meditate and you reflect and like then maybe things are going to become clearer or you're going to have, more creative ideas for how to solve the problem when you're in a calmer space. So on the left here is some of the mistakes I see people doing. Um, contaminating cars, bringing couches to a new place, refusing to move, even though they're getting sicker and sicker and sicker. Some areas to look for. So we have way more on this in the course. I just threw in some slides, because Coach Mickey teaches you how to go from like room to room and what to look for. So here's some of the things you can look for. And I know we had a question earlier on inspection and how to hire a good inspector, which is great. But sometimes you can't afford that inspector. Sometimes you can't find one to come to where you're at. And there's lots of ways to inspect yourself. And I know that the company we inspect has a course on it. We actually have a bonus on it in the program from them. So I do think it's great to have a great inspector, 100%. But there are some things that you can do yourself to start inspecting. This is one tool that is really helpful, a humidity gauge. So I know my new thermostat has a humidity gauge, but say I had a basement, I would need a gauge in the basement too. And you want to keep humidity below 50%. Once you get past that, it can be a breeding ground for mold because you have different fibers in your space and now there's moisture. So that can make mold grow. This, for the person asking earlier, these are some of the credentials that a person may have if they've had training as an inspector. So you can screenshot this if you want. But you can ask your, inspector what modalities they use. You don't want them to only use an air test. You want them to sample in different ways. You want them to use like a moisture meter. You want them to check things like gutters, attic, crawl space, the outside of your home. The inspector we hired, we didn't know anything, right? But we just happened to hire a really good inspector. He did different types of sampling. He found areas where he thought, water had entered. It's not their job to tell you what to do with your health, but it is their job to do a thorough inspection. And ours didn't have to do this because we had like clearly mold and water happening, but sometimes you have to bore into a wall to do a collection there, just a tiny little hole. Some things can't be found without actually like doing a little drilling in. Here's some of the methods that can be used with testing are kind of paired with inspection. And this is the last myth, just use bleach, right? So I think you guys know that's not a good idea. It's not thorough enough. So material needs to be removed that's been damaged. And the problem with bleach is the water component. So bleach does have ingredients that can kill mold, but the water in it can feed mold. So it's kind of a mixed situation. So yeah, it's definitely oversimplified as a way to handle mold. It's a very detailed process that you need to follow completely, whether you're going to stay or not. Some people move out, but then bring their stuff with them. I probably mentioned that a bunch of times because it's a big problem I see. So if you are going to stay in the home, there have to be steps taken while you remediate, after you remediate, how you clean, what you keep. It's basically like you're getting a new inside of your home. So it's very expensive to do, and you have to be incredibly, incredibly careful, which is why I usually just prefer people to move out, whether they remediate and sell or reveal, disclose the problem and sell. It's just very hard to get that house to a point where it's safe if you've been really sick. Is it impossible? No. But it is expensive and it has to be done really, really correctly. I think that person was asking about an inspector, but here's something about hiring a remediator. So you can screenshot this if you want to. So again, a remediator doesn't have to know all about health, but they have to be willing to take, extra precautions per se if, you've had mold illness or, follow the plan that you want followed instead of just follow what they do. So for example, in my own home, we hired a remediator first in our basement to pull out some drywall and carpet and stuff like that. And he ran an air scrubber and he put up plastic, but he also told us to take everything from the basement and put it on the main floor. So what happened? Now we got sicker on the main floor because all this moldy stuff was now on the main floor. That's not really his fault. He just isn't trained in stuff. So it's really best that you know the procedure, right? That you have the best sense that you can. Don't just put all your power in someone else. Understand the process for yourself. May need to fix this slide, but see, this is just a sampling that there's a lot to know about mold. I hope I didn't stress you out. But I just wanted to really go for it to show you these are questions we've pondered, we've, thought about. I know these myths are out there. I'm sure you guys have heard them. And that's why we want to train more people to do this work. There's so much need. And, there aren't that many training courses. I only know of one or two besides ours. So here's a few of our students from last time. I know Yvonne in the middle is coming back. I don't know if she's here today, but we may have a few former students come back and kind of retake the course, but also kind of be there as mentors for you. So that's really sweet. Most of our students have been coaches, but some are thinking of getting into the industry. We've had 2 pharmacists on the last course. We had a couple of people just there for personal interest. We definitely have a lot of FDNs. I don't know if there are any FDNs on this call, but I think we had at least 5 FDNs last time, and they will give you credit for this course. So just kind of more of the same, kind of some of the people that we've seen come through. And I'll go over this pretty briefly, but this is the format of the course. It's an 8-week live course. If you can't make it live, it is recorded and transcript and time-stamped. So you will be able to go back and check in on different things we taught and see them again. It's 8 weeks in a row. I'm going to do one extra call on case studies. We are adding more about case studies this time because that's the one thing people wanted more of. We have a lot of handouts for you. And again, like this is a client, a former student who is an FDN. And as you know, it teaches you a lot about the body, but there's just kind of no replacement for getting this in depth about mold as we do. So we did, make things even better this time around. If you take the course quiz and you want to be listed in a directory, we can list you. So we're just trying to, make it better and better for you. And here's briefly like what happens in every lesson. Some things I might want to point out here, like mast cell reactions, Herx reactions. We get a lot of questions about colonization and protocols for that. Quite a bit about testing, home, quite a bit about the home, 2 whole lessons on the home, I think. Drainage pathways, all the different binder options, related symptom. I do the thing on related symptoms and like protocols for the symptoms. And just kind of, I do a lot around helping you assess the client and give them what they need in that stage. It's not cookie cutter. It's just working with who's in front of you and what's safe to give them right now. And here's some of the bonus content. I'm just showing this briefly, but we have some pretty cool stuff because we have some pretty great friends, some of whom may have sent you to this webinar. So we've got you actually get some plate tests for free. You got a lot of cool little extras, especially around home, which is nice. I'll put the link in the chat for you, but you can use this QR code if you want to pull up the page. And we have frequently asked questions on there and stuff like that. I'll just leave this up for one more second and then I'll go take questions. So thank you for listening to me for so long. I think I went even longer that time. Okay, 1 second. Okay, so I'm going to put the link in the chat and on the little screen, and then I'll go take some questions. Oh, I'm not quite sure how to do what I'm trying to do, but I put it in the chat anyway. Thanks, Heather. Great. I'm glad you're doing this work. That's awesome. Oh, Davey, yeah, the replay is ready as soon as I'm off. So that's what I love about doing this format because it's a YouTube live. So as soon as I'm off, it'll be available. Yeah, and if you have some folks who are a little skeptical, maybe still, just you just approach it as hey, I thought this was interesting. I thought you might find it interesting. There's only so much we can take at once, right? This may have been a lot for some of you guys even because it's a lot of information. We live in an information age, so just take in as much at a time as you can. And that's what I did when I was going through mold. I was still had a young child. I owned a clinic. I was seeing clients. Don't ask me how I was doing all this stuff. So I just learned, as I could. And I took time off. So you definitely have to find a balance. Marina said, LabCorp makes a mold allergen profile. Is this a good test to take? It's not detecting what's in your body for mycotoxins. It's just detecting that you're reacting to molds, and that could indicate that you're exposed to those molds now, but it's just kind of missing some information, in my opinion. It may be a good secondary tool, maybe especially if you have also airborne allergies. Right now, I'm pretty much recovered, but I have developed respiratory sensitivity. So like probably now would be a good time for me to understand allergies better for myself. But we don't ever use it like for our diagnostic purposes, like when someone's like actually going through mold in the moment. So I hope that makes sense. Kat asked about chronic EBV and mold. Yeah. So my first practitioner was really keen on treating EBV, and like that would get rid of the mold. But that's, well, she did do some like binders too. But if you think about how much the mold and mycotoxins depress the immune system, which is significant, you're going to have infections. You're going to have EBV, parasites, like any number of things, candida. They're going to thrive because your body is losing a battle to fight them. So that, in my opinion, that's definitely not something to treat early stage, but later stage, you may want to treat it with like herbals, or you can just really keep boosting the immune system while you detox. So there's different strategies. Like I have done things to directly treat EBV for myself and candida and stuff like that. Because when I was in my later stage, then I was just still like infections and low hormone levels, and like all the aftermath was going on for me. So yeah, I definitely see that relationship. If you have chronic EBV or you have Lyme, I would look for mold for sure if you haven't yet. There's mold in some low quality spaces. Oh, spices. Yeah. So in food stuff, mold can grow as well. And sometimes with spices, we let them sit forever and ever, right? You're really only supposed to let them be for 3 months, which is quite short. So it can be in food stuffs, certainly. I wouldn't say that's the biggest source in our modern culture. And like my clients usually have a really conscious diet. So they're really not getting much mold, but corn is our number one foodstuff here in the US that can be moldy. So you can take out moldy foods before you run a urine test, for example, just so you don't get any like false positives. And then while you're recovering from mold, you may want to remove any potential mold sources. There's usually an overlap between foods that are high in histamines and foods that are moldy. There's some overlap. So there's some foods, that can be just too inflammatory or potentially irritating while you're going through mold. Ultimately, we want to open up the diet, have a client be able to eat more and more foods. However, certain foods are never really great for us, right? So Paula from Florida has mold. Yeah, Florida is so beautiful. I love Florida, but definitely a place where mold and natural disasters can be going on. Debbie from Los Angeles having mold. Yeah, there's quite a bit in California. And again, you're kind of seeing the weather patterns change. If California's had so much rain after so much drought, and a home or the sewer system could be not prepared for all that rain, right? They never really had these kind of strong rains. So yeah, the buckling floor can be a sign of water damage for sure, Marina. Okay, so Gary and Luann, I think we kind of covered a little bit about inspectors, so I hope you got that. Let's see, any new questions? And yeah, Karen, similarly, chronic fatigue syndrome, or what's the other one? Fibromyalgia can be linked to mold. Are there other reasons for chronic fatigue? Certainly. And you could have a mix of reasons. But the way that mold affects your mitochondria, it stresses your adrenals. They just even like affects your adrenals. Fatigue is, I would say, the most common symptoms are fatigue and brain fog. Food sensitivities, I think, is probably third. So, and then there's kind of a smattering of pain and mood issues. Sleep issues is really common. Respiratory issues are not required. So I think that's another myth I could probably add to this is like, if you have mold, you have trouble breathing. I didn't feel that way at all when I was actually in mold. Now I have some trouble breathing in the aftermath of it, but the respiratory is definitely not required. I think it's a little more common with kids, the respiratory symptoms. So, okay. Jared, yeah, I feel you. It can be difficult to figure it out if you're renting and you don't have a lot of money to move. I know I have a friend in the East Coast, there's not a lot of places to move. Sometimes people are doing kind of drastic stuff, doing long-term camping, moving to another state, living with family, this kind of a thing. So if you feel like you don't see any options, I encourage you to like just experiment with like kind of thinking out of the box, and something actually may come up that you're like, oh, I never thought about that, and that might really work out for me. George, I think we have a little bit on some different like bacterial testing, but I don't think we have like a lot of it in our particular course. I think that's what you're asking about. And Jared was also asking, like, can you just take care of mold with like fogging and essential oils? Yeah, when people say like they use some special machine or fogger and that completely got rid of the problem, that's not really the correct way to remediate, and I've been lucky to be friends with some of the top remediators in this country, and you can't leave like the material, you can't leave, a moldy, what's the word for like I can't, no, I'm having brain fog. Like a wall board, what is that called? Drywall. You can't leave that and just fog it and stuff. Like some people will tell you can just fog or use some kind of machine. It's just not proper remediation to leave those materials. So, actually we have Mike Rubino coming into the course as a guest. So I try to bring in outside home people, because even though I know about the home, it's like not my number one thing to always like explain. So if you guys have attended my mold summit in the past, we've had different instructors, and they can kind of explain more on like the why. But the short answer is like I don't think those things might be like a holdover. And I think like this diffusing essential oil is great, like say while you're doing remediation, while you're like in the midst of a move, or it can be a step like one for maintenance or for cleaning, but it's not like a remediation, right? So, oh, Jared, yeah, I'm sorry. Well, yeah, I hope I gave you a few ideas there. Can mold cause tinea pedis athlete's foot? Yeah, it can definitely be related because of that same immune component in the microbiome being off, like we mentioned. Pretty much, if you say can blank because of mold, the answer is like always basically yes, because it disrupts, like we didn't talk about it as much in this webinar, but it disrupts potentially every single body system. So it can cause so many symptoms. Some I didn't even hear about as much till later, like bedwetting and nightmares. So definitely contribute to serious mental health disorders too, like bipolar, like as people are growing up in mold. So stuff like that I've heard about. Can produce have mold? Yeah, like you mentioned, cleaning it properly. And I don't think we're getting most of our mold from food, because we have refrigerators and everything now. But I don't, I would avoid leftovers. I would avoid like storing food for a long time. Our modern bread can like seem like it lasts forever, but it's kind of scary. Like, why is it why is it lasting so long? So I think food storage and food cleanliness are really important. Hydrogen peroxide to spray on mold. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't never use it much myself, but I think it is an effective tool for mold for just like cleaning. Um, that's a good question. Can the bonuses be sent to the UK? I think as long as the like it's allowed to cross the border, they may ask you to pay an extra fee for like the postage. But I think as long as like it's allowed to travel like legally, some kind of things are not allowed to cross borders. But most of the bonuses are virtual. I think it's just one bonus has like the mold plates and stuff. So yeah, that's probably the only one thing that sorry about that. Yeah, we can look into that. But I think if you pay the difference, like that seems fair, right? I'll just take these last couple questions and then we'll wrap up. Homeopathic medicine, Christopher's asking about. Yeah, I mean, that's not my specialty and it's not Mickey's either, but it could potentially be helpful for sure. Anything that can support the body or deal with like short-term infections. I think homeopathy is really great. I used to be an acupuncturist and people will ask me like, is it helpful? And yes, it's certainly helpful. It's not my number one tool anymore, so I don't talk about it as much. But there's so many ways, like the body needs so much support right now in so many different ways, right? For mood stuff too, the homeopathics could be helpful. And then Jane asked about cleaning a crawl space. It sounds like it has a heater in it. Crawl spaces that are really notoriously moldy, Jane, I think they usually have to be like sealed off with like a barrier, like a vapor barrier. And if there's a heater in there, probably you need to like seal it off and address the crawl space and then replace the heater. I don't know if you can clean the heater. I don't know what type of heater it is. I'm also wondering why it's in the crawl space. Could it be moved? I know that might be expensive. The crawl spaces are really notoriously an issue. So yeah, I think this vapor barrier treatment is what you're supposed to get. Marina, the replay plays at the same YouTube after the same link you went to afterwards. And Christopher, mold plates are like a sticky plate that you can either leave out and mold spores will like collect and grow from them. So that's one way, an affordable way to test mold. You can also, that same company offers like a tap method. So you can even like tap your dogs, tap your couch, and it will collect stuff, right? And because it's a wet surface, it will grow molds. If it comes in contact with mold, it will grow, and then you read the plate. It can be a great way to test because you can put plates in many areas. I've had people put plates in their workspace, and they're more affordable than running like a dust test. So I like a dust test too, but the plate tests or swab tests can get more specific about certain areas and also save you a little bit of money. So great. Well, great questions, you guys. Sorry I was a little disorganized and late for my time change confusion. I will put the link to the program again. If you're thinking at all about getting more in depth in this field, either just for yourself or for your loved ones or for clients, we'd love to have you. I think the most exciting population I get in the course are people who are thinking of doing this, and they're just taking their first steps. Like they have a passion for it. They have like a heart for it. They know they want to help in some way. I'd love to be, someone who gets you kind of moving in this industry. So you are needed, and it can be very rewarding work. So, yeah. Well, thanks everyone. I really appreciate it, and I'll be in touch. I'll also email the replay. and I'll sum up the 8 myths for you. And again, would love to have you in the course. The enrollment closes this March, and this course starts April 2nd. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.